Australia is not safe anymore. The two recent stabbings in Bondi Junction Mall and the Good Shepherd Church are part of a much larger trend where the country has gone so downhill in recent years that hundreds of thousands of long-term residents are now leaving for safer places. Just yesterday, I read a report where the Director General of the Australian Security and Intelligence Organisation announced that the national threat level in the country had been set to possible, meaning that another deadly attack could happen in the next 12 months. Crime has steadily been on the rise in Australia. According to reports by the Australian National Institute of Criminology, homicide rates in Australia have risen by almost 16% in the last 10 years and are the highest they've been in more than a decade. Remember how I said that the recent stabbings are part of a larger trend? Well, this report by the AIC stated that stabbings are actually the most common cause of homicides in Australia now. To make matters worse, the biggest perpetrators of these homicides have been strangers, meaning that you always have to be on alert when you're outside. Crime has never been higher and we've seen 2 mass killings within just a few weeks. Now, what's the government doing in the midst of all of this? Instead of focusing on improving the lives of its citizens, the only thing the Australian government seems to want is control on every aspect of your life and more taxes. After the pandemic ended, we had more than a dozen of our Australian clients come to us and ask about how they could move to other countries. Australia had some of the strictest COVID rules in the world during the pandemic and wouldn't even allow its citizens to return to their country. Can you even imagine being stuck in a different country and your own country refuses you to let you go back home? For people who were stuck living in their country, these restrictions were even worse. While quarantine had ended basically everywhere else, and people were travelling around the world, Australians weren't even allowed to step out onto their street. People couldn't even meet their family and they couldn't even meet their friends and they couldn't do anything. Interestingly, at the same time, taxes keep going up. Australian citizens are liable to pay up to 45% tax on their personal income and their capital gains. Even the IRS in the US, which is famous for being tax aggressive, doesn't even tax people this much. The Australian Tax Office takes taxing to a whole new level. Recently, there's even been talk of imposing even stricter tax rules that will tax citizens who don't even live in Australia. These new tax rules, called the Bright Line Residency Test, are going to make it almost impossible to escape Australian taxes even if you leave the country. According to government proposals, which are expected to go live potentially this year, people who stay in Australia for more than 45 days a year will be considered tax residents of Australia and will be liable to pay taxes in Australia. This new rule could even apply to tourists and businessmen just looking to visit. The current threshold to be considered a tax resident of Australia is 183 days, but the Australian Board of Taxation has actively been trying to lower this threshold down to just 45 days. Imagine giving almost 50% of your income to a country that you don't even live in anymore. You could shift all your business and family to some foreign country, but as long as you happen to be in Australia for more than 45 days, you're going to be liable to pay a ton of taxes. Your summer vacation could cost you a fortune even if you end up staying more than 45 days. Just take a look at the tax brackets for this year. For every dollar you make over 180,000 Australian dollars, you're going to be taxed at a shocking 45%. Compare this to other countries like the UAE, where you don't have to pay any income tax and at the same time, the crime rate is basically zero. You get to keep all of your money and you don't have to worry about getting stabbed every time you step outside. There are other options too, like Malta and Greece. Both of these countries offer residency by investment programs where you can get a residency for life in exchange for an investment starting from 120,000 euros. Also, one thing that you need to keep in mind when leaving Australia is exiting the country in the correct way. As I mentioned before, the Australian Tax Office is incredibly aggressive when it comes to tax collection, and you don't want to be in a situation where you decide to come back to Australia after a few years to find out that you're liable to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes. I've actually had this happen to a friend who left Australia but never officially stopped being a tax resident there. You need to make sure you become a tax resident of the country you move to if you truly want to escape Australia. I would also recommend that you look into getting a second passport as a backup plan. With a second citizenship, even if the Australian government decides to impose pandemic level restrictions in the future on its citizens again, you'll have a plan B for freedom and residency with no one restricting your movement. Right now, you can get a second citizenship with excellent international mobility for as little as 100,000 US dollars. Caribbean Commonwealth countries such as Antigua and Barbuda, Grenada, Dominica, and St. Lucia offer some of the best value for money citizenship by investment programs in the world, and you can become a citizen of these countries in as little as just 6 months. It is important to keep in mind that these programs aren't going to be here forever, and if you want a second passport, you need to really act now. I've already made a video on the recent EU announcements regarding the future of second citizenships, so be sure to check that out. As someone whose firm has helped dozens of people from Australia and other parts of the world move to safer countries where your government doesn't control every aspect of your life and isn't taxing your hard-earned money, I would recommend that you consider getting a second citizenship or a second residency before the bright line residency rules come into effect. If you need help doing that, book a call with me today or check out my website in the description below.